This is the story of a man named Lame Johnny, who may or may not have been the leader of a gang, who may or may not have robbed a stagecoach in the 1870s, who may or may not actually be named Lame Johnny, and who may or may not have lost 2 bars of gold worth nearly $500,000 in the Black Hills of South Dakota. Welcome to Hidden Treasures. In the 1870s, a man named John Hurley showed up in Deadwood, South Dakota. He was prospecting for gold along Castle Creek. However, he wasn't a very good prospector, and he soon went from job to job before landing a job as the bookkeeper for the Homestake Mining Company. By all accounts, at this point in his life, he was a law-abiding, upstanding citizen, but it wasn't long before someone recognized him for who he really was. He was actually a horse thief from Texas named Cornelius Donahue. When he was recognized, he was afraid that he was going to be arrested, sent back to Texas, and have to do time, so he fled and went back to his old ways of stealing horses. When Cornelius Donahue was a child, he either fell and hurt his hip or he had polio. Either way, he ended up with a limp. On account of his limp and the fact that he called himself John Hurley, everyone in the area knew him as Lame Johnny. After hiding out and stealing some horses, he got to know some of the local gangsters and ended up in a gang that was known for robbing stagecoaches. This gang included Archie McLaughlin, Charles Carey, Frank McBride, and Bill Mansfield. There were several outfits in the area that were robbing stagecoaches, so the company that was in charge of transport came up with a new design for a stagecoach. The stagecoach was called the Monitor. It was covered in 5/16" iron plating. It also had portholes cut into it, so the messengers on the inside could shoot out at anyone that was trying to rob the stagecoach while they were secure inside behind that iron plating. This was really the armored car of stagecoaches. On September 26, 1878, the Monitor left Deadwood, South Dakota, and was headed for Canyon Springs Station in Wyoming. Riding on the stagecoach was a driver, a man riding shotgun, 3 guardsmen inside, and 1 passenger. While the Monitor was en route from Deadwood, a lone rider rode up to Canyon Springs Station and asked the attendant there for water. As the attendant reached for water, the man pulled out a gun, pointed it at him. The attendant didn't have a weapon, so he just put up his hands and gave up. The rider got down from his horse, took the attendant into a granary, and locked him inside. Now that the station was secure, 4 other men rode up. They went inside, knocked holes in the walls so they could point their guns out where they knew the stagecoach was going to be. As scheduled, the Monitor showed up at 3 p.m. It was standard protocol for the Monitor to blow their horn to signal that they were approaching, and the men that were supposed to exchange shifts would come outside, they would switch. This whole process from start to finish would only take about 7 minutes. However, this time they pulled up, blew the horn, nobody came out. The driver of the stagecoach, a man named Barnett, began walking up to the station to find out where the attendant was, while the man riding shotgun, a man named Hill, went to the back of the stagecoach and started chalking the back wheels. It was at this point that they were their most vulnerable, and that's when gunshots rang out. The first shot hit Hill in his arm, but he managed to pull out his gun, start firing back. The second shot hit him right in the chest. He hit the ground and was able to crawl to safety. One of the next shots came through the wooden roof of the stagecoach. The shrapnel from the bullet and the wood hit one of the guardsmen in the head, knocking him out cold. He hit the floor and was bleeding out of the head. The other guardsman named Davis came out the side of the wagon, went around and hid behind a pine tree as he was shooting back at the outlaws. The passenger that was inside the wagon with the 2 guardsmen decided his best bet was to follow Davis out and get behind the pine tree, but on his way there, he was shot and he died. Barnett, the driver, got back on the stage and tried to take off and get out of there. One of the outlaws, McBride, came out of the station, stopped the horses, tried to grab the reins from Barnett, but that's when Davis from behind the pine tree shot McBride. McBride was wounded severely but ended up making it back inside the station. One of the other outlaws inside the station, James Carey, saw what was going on. He came out firing at Davis, hidden behind the pine tree. He grabbed Barnett, the driver, and held him as a human shield while he fired at Davis. Davis at this point knew that he couldn't fire back at Carey because he would probably hit the driver, so he just took off running, trying to get to the nearest ranch. Davis knew that the nearest ranch was Ben Eager's ranch, and it was 7 miles away. That's the direction he headed. That's where he was going to get help. The outlaws then spent the next 2 hours opening up the safe and divvying up the contents. The treasure consisted of 3 gold ingots, one 150 ounces, one 183 ounces, and one 248 ounces, worth $9,555. 1,056 ounces of gold dust and nuggets worth $14,520, $5,000 worth of diamonds, $500 in jewelry, and $2,000 in currency, a total value of $27,075. Some while later, at the next station down the line, the Beaver Creek station, 3 messengers awaited. Boone May, Bill Sample, and Jesse Brown waited at Beaver Creek station for the monitor, which was way overdue. They decided to ride up the line to Canyon Springs station to see what was going on. On the way there, they met Davis riding the other way, trying to come to get help from them. He had borrowed a horse from Eager Ranch, and he was out looking for help. They all rode up to Canyon Springs Station, where they found the attendant locked up in the granary, and the other 4 men that were supposed to switch out tied up in the woods behind the station. Word immediately spread about this robbery, and posses were formed in South Dakota and in Wyoming to go out and look for them immediately. The news of this robbery actually spread extremely fast. By the next day, it reached New York City, and there was an article in the New York Times. Boone May, one of the men that had been at Beaver Creek Station, was very well known in the area for being the best gunfighter in the Black Hills. Lame Johnny had actually indicated that he was very afraid of Boone May, and that if he was ever caught by anyone, that is not who he wanted it to be. Boone May formed his own posse, and they tracked down and found a local who had sold a wagon to the outlaws. This wagon was actually being used to carry McBride, who was in really bad shape and couldn't ride himself. The posse joined up with at least one other posse in the area, and they were able to track this wagon for several miles until they reached Pino Springs. Just outside of Pino Springs, they decided to ambush the outlaws, and they waited overnight, and the next morning they went to ambush them, and they had found that the outlaws had left. Not only had they left, but overnight McBride had died. They buried him. They no longer needed the wagon, so after this they were more difficult to track. The outlaws tracked the posse to Fort Pierre on the Missouri River, but there they lost the trail. Why these guys didn't just keep heading east with their loot? They were rich and they could have just gone and disappeared with it. I can't explain, but they ended up several months later getting rounded up right back where they started in the Black Hills. On October 3rd, Carey was captured. He was interrogated, then hanged. McLaughlin and Mansfield were actually caught in Deadwood trying to sell some of their gold when they were caught. They were sent to Cheyenne to stand trial, but along the way, a vigilante crew stopped the wagon, pulled them out, and threatened to kill them if they didn't confess. The men confessed, so the vigilante group knew that if they went to Cheyenne, stood trial, that confession would come out, and they would be killed there, so no blood on their hands. They put them back on the wagon and sent them on their way. When they got to Cheyenne, they found out that there was a long delay before they could actually stand trial, so they shipped them back to Deadwood. On the way back to Deadwood, the vigilante crew showed back up, pulled them off. This time they weren't so nice, and they hanged them. As for Lame Johnny, he was caught in Pine Ridge. He was to be transferred to Deadwood, where he was staying trial. Sure enough, the guard that was transporting him was Boone May. Along the way, Boone May all of a sudden just disappeared. Nobody knew where he went. And sure enough, a couple miles down the road, a vigilante crew showed up, pulled out Lame Johnny, and hanged him from the nearest tree. From the accounts of the people that survived the stagecoach robbery, there was no mention of Lame Johnny at all. Everyone knew that Lame Johnny was a part of this crew, but it was also kind of expected that he was kind of the mastermind. Reports later on indicate that James Carey was most likely the mastermind, and Lame Johnny really didn't have the aptitude for that. Though Lame Johnny may have deserved what he got, he probably wasn't part of the crew that robbed the stagecoach. From interrogating these outlaws, they were actually able to recover about 60% of the loot that had been stolen. But 2 items remain missing: 2 large gold bricks worth about $500,000 in today's money. It's believed that those gold bars are hidden somewhere around Deadwood, and they still haven't been found to this day. If you enjoyed the story, don't forget to like, leave comments, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.